Let's go to the here and now, the grubby reality of politics. Chris Matthews talking about neocons gave me a flashback to the Iraq War and George W. Bush's approval ratings sinking into the low 30s and ultimately into the high 20s, just like Harry Truman's. And here we are again with a war in the Middle East that's not going well. And we have a president in the low 30s. What's going on with this poll?
Yeah, this poll is a big bright light for Republicans and for Trump. You're exactly right. His numbers in this poll are extremely reminiscent of second-term George W. Bush and the Iraq War. And I think that Iran is really driving a lot of this. To your point, his ratings have come down even from their previous low before the Iran conflict started. And so there's no doubt that that is driving down perceptions. But the number in the poll that really jumped out to me was the fact that only 23% of Americans approve of the job he's doing on cost of living. That is the number one issue for voters right now. They voted for him because he was going to bring down the cost of living. And the most troubling warning sign for Republicans is that 47% of Republicans disapprove of the job Donald Trump is doing on the cost of living. And so Iran is sort of a two-pronged problem for him. The first problem is it's not going well. People oppose being there. It's driving up gas prices. But it also is showing voters that Donald Trump's eye is not on the ball that they want it to be on, which is the cost of living.
The poll is full of fascinating numbers. Independents, Republicans themselves, cost of living issues, the amount of people who don't like Donald Trump. Republicans are in trouble facing the midterms. Last night in Virginia was another sign that Republicans are going to be facing trouble in the midterms. How much are Democrats able to capitalize on this? How much are they being able to say, OK, we're not just the party that runs against Trump, as we tried to do in 2016, as we tried to do in 2020, but we're actually going to be the party that has something to offer Americans that they can compel around.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, there's one party in control right now across town, and that's Republicans.
Right.
So, you know what? Democrats right now just don't have to be that. If you think back, 2024, Republicans won across the country on issues around affordability and came to power, were hired to fix the economy, and it seems as if we have done everything but that. We were doging. By the way, we just threw another $1 trillion on the debt. Elon, you can probably thank Elon Musk for Virginia redistricting. Liberation Day, and then America First, Chris, as you just said, became America Strikes First. And now we have a war. We had one thing going for us, gas prices. That evaporated. And now as we head into the midterms, what are the best political signs out there? The sign at the gas station. And now that has just become such a pain at the pump. We used to say in Biden years, immigration, every state is a border state. Now with the war in Iran, every state is a gas state. So none of this bodes well. It should not be surprising. First term, I was there. We like to pride ourselves on peace and prosperity. Now we have war and unaffordability, and it is no wonder that the American public is absolutely frustrated.
Molly, back to you. Certainly, we have this poll, new one from the AP, and over the weekend from NBC, that show, yes, Americans are frustrated with the president's foreign policy, but their biggest concern remains the economy. He was, in 2024, more than anything else, was elected because he promised to bring prices down. You see it there. The economy is still number one, 29%. Voters say it's the issue that matters most to them. And I think that issue is, as much as Iran is turning into just a complete mess for the president, but it's the economy that's the biggest issue for Republicans as they look towards November. Last time we spoke, the House certainly seems heavily favored to go Democrats, but more and more in that party also feel fairly bullish about the Senate as well, starting to think about places like Ohio and Iowa, Maine, even Alaska. The list continues to go on. The map seems to be expanding. What's your take there about the upper chamber?
The Senate is on the table here. When the president's approval rating is at or below 40%, that is when you start to see these deeper pickups in much more Republican heavy terrain. And the states that you just listed Ohio and Alaska and Iowa are places that Trump won handily in 2024, and Republicans tend to do well. But if you look at the performance of Democrats in these special elections and these off-year elections, you're seeing enthusiasm skewed towards Democrats in terms of turnout. And what you're also seeing is deflated enthusiasm and sort of a turning from independents towards Democrats, who independents in 2024 broke for Donald Trump and broke for Republicans. And when those two things happen, you start to expand the map in a real and meaningful way. And absolutely, the Senate is on the table. It would be foolish for people to assume it's not, even with the states that are as difficult as they are on paper. The other piece is Democrats have great candidates in those races. And so it is not just about the fact that Donald Trump is unpopular, but you have great candidates who speak to the state, understand their voters, and are going to be able to offer those voters something different in terms of the leadership that they're looking for.
Yeah, and Chris, you see that in Alaska, you see it across the country. I want to look at what happened in Hungary for a minute because I think it actually shows Democrats what works. The campaign against Orban, an autocrat who controlled all the levers of the state, still got wiped out. There's so many things that come at us, whether it's Minneapolis, whether it's retribution, whether it's violating constitutional norms. And Democrats, at times, there's so much incoming they can't figure out what the best thing to do is. Orban's opponent didn't talk about immigration. He didn't talk about the rule of law. He didn't talk about all of these other things that we talk about. He talked about costs, and he talked about corruption. It was the economy, stupid, in Budapest. Costs and corruption. And corruption really played. When I ran in 1994, we were talking about a lot of different things. We were talking about tax increases. You name it. But at the end of the day, the bank checking scandal, if you brought that up, nobody remembers that now, maybe but me or you. It's like a bell went off. And with corruption, it's so powerful because it's like, wait a second, they're taking care of themselves instead of taking care of my family. They're more focused on making their kids billionaires than they are making sure I can send my kid to a state college. It's devastating. So Democrats now suddenly have costs, the number one issue, corruption. And then you add to that chaos, where you have a president threatening to wipe out an entire civilization, a president suggesting that he's Jesus, a Secretary of Defense saying, oh, I went to church and guess what I learned? Yeah, Donald Trump is like Jesus, and members of the media who are trying to figure out what's going on in the war are Pharisees. That's chaos. And when you look at those numbers, that's exhausting even members of the Republican base. And I know it because I know a lot of them.
It was a time when President Roosevelt, I wasn't around, but of course, he would talk about providence and he'd talk about God in a very general way, not a sectarian way. Pete Hegseth talked about Jesus Christ as the reason for the war. Give me a break. And then the president said he is Jesus Christ. I'm sorry, that the going after the Pope is another one of these strange things. I think that there are new conditions right now. We have Donald Trump as president, a populist president, but we have an American Pope, a real American talking Pope who talks like an American, a guy who played and rooted for Villanova basketball, a guy from south side of Chicago. All of a sudden, Catholics, young people are starting to go to church, and they're thinking, we have a church that's like us now. We feel very comfortable with it. And I think that's something that Trump has to realize. He doesn't realize it. And I think Pete Hegseth, my God, I don't know what he's talking about with this Jesus Christ thing. You got to be careful in politics. Everybody represents a different sectarian belief, the different Protestant denominations, and you can't talk like this. And then when they go in Israel and the two soldiers beating up the statue of Jesus, I go, wait a minute, who told those soldiers that was the right thing to do? Where'd they get their orders from? They got 30 days. Okay, what their boss is getting, why'd they think that was the right thing to do on camera, to take picture of that? What's that about? A lot of evangelicals have great respect for Israel. Maybe they think of the Old Testament, they think of the old Israel, but they are very committed to it. And this picture, and I understand why Huckabee's upset about it, this is awful. And there's something really strange. You don't talk about God. And by the way, J.D. Harris, he's a new Catholic, which is fine, I guess. But don't tell the Pope not to talk about religion. This is render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God. The Pope's supposed to talk about religion, Mr. Vice President. That's what he talks about. And don't tell him not to talk about religion. That's a strange, odd thing for a convert to a religion to tell the Pope to quiet down on religion. I just think it's crazy talk. And I don't think J.D. Vance is crazy. I think there's just something in the air now, I guess. I don't know.
The top Republican on Capitol Hill, John Thune, agrees with you. And he said, theology? That's what the Pope does. And Caddy K, his advice to Donald Trump and also to J.D. Vance was to stop talking about theology, leave that to the Pope, and worry about affordability. And as Chris said, he said, what's this Jesus Christ thing when he's talking about Jesus is taking us into war? Don't throw Jesus under the bus. Don't blame Jesus for wars in Iran. It's not going to work. They made that decision, and Pete Hegseth was right up front, along with Benjamin Netanyahu and along with Lindsey Graham, telling the president everything was going to go swimmingly well there. So now don't blame Jesus for a war that began with the killing of over 150 schoolgirls.
Yeah, I mean, look, Donald Trump has had a playbook right back to his time in the 1980s when he was tutored by Roy Cohn, when he was getting into real estate. And one of the things he learned was never to accept responsibility, never to apologize, always to say you're winning, always to find a distraction and get things shifted off the topic if it's not going so well for you. But the trouble for him now, I think, Matt, is that playbook isn't working, right? I mean, you could go through, one of the things he learned, threaten, use your leverage. That's not working against the Iranians. Find a distraction, talk about the Pope and Jesus. That's not working. People are still focused on gas prices. Everything that he's trying to do, that is his MO, this time around, he's found himself in a situation where he's pulling all the tools from the toolbox, but they aren't doing the job that he wants them to do.
Yeah, like a tired old lounge singer. The greatest hits just don't hit like they used to. And, you talked about affordability. And to steal a late 90s economic term from Mr. Andrea Mitchell, I think after the 2024 election, Republican Party had some irrational exuberance from winning and coming back to power, and then just absolutely jettisoned the affordability issues that continue to be so sticky, so stubborn in this economy. But then Joe just mentioned, the corruption issue. Listen, I'm a Republican. I am a conservative. If you had questions about Hunter Biden, well, let me tell you right now, you should have some questions about this administration, because all it is adding zeros to the end of the number. All it is another Excel column worth of corruption across agencies. We've seen some reporting, some openly brazen action. So I think there certainly will be some accountability. But yes, it is the affordability and the economic priority that will continue to rule the day here in America.
MS Now political analyst Matt Bartlett, president of Impact Research Molly Murphy. Thank you both. Chris Matthews, thank you as well. Chris's new piece titled "Don't Despise Your Enemy Too Much" is available on his Substack.